Everyone for coming along. I'm Shreya Arday. I'm an associate professor in international human rights law. I'm a fellow at Kellogg, importantly a fellow with responsibility for BME matters. And on behalf of Kellogg College and our president, Jonathan Mickey, I welcome you all to college. I see friends from African Society, from the law faculty, Decolonizing the Law Group. Welcome to everyone. We're at Kellogg giving a distinctive experience at Oxford, and I was wondering about that a bit. And of course, one way of looking at that is that we are the most international of all colleges. So just in terms of the sheer cosmopolitanism that you get here, we are looking at the most number of nationalities in any of the colleges at Oxford. And until last year, until Ruben came on the block, we were also the youngest college. And perhaps for that reason also, and that's a qualitative measure, so you can take me to task here. Perhaps the most egalitarian as well. We don't have a high table. We normally don't wear gowns. It was just for special effect for this very special event. This is our special event, and we're distinctive, and I think one of the reasons we're distinctive is that we care about what's happening in relation to racism and anti-racism in Oxford. And for that reason, we care a lot about the Black History Month, and who better to host than our speaker today. I'm not going to introduce our speaker to you today. I'm just going to say, for all of you who've read the title and the abstract of today's talk, I know why you're here. I know that you care about not just listening to racism happens here, etc., but you want to hear something transformative, radical, revolutionary, and something which might change our minds about how do we do this. We don't just have to accept it, but how do we change things around? Change is not a word which is very popular in Oxford, but it's nice to say it sometimes, and it's nice to have our speaker today tell us how do we get there. There's also a special reason why Jason is the speaker today, because he's had a very intimate relationship with the Race Equality Task Force. So perhaps the most fitting person to introduce Jason is our own fellow, renowned British historian, Yasmin Khan. Yasmin was on the Race Equality Task Force. It'll be great to hear from you, Yasmin, about both the Race Equality Task Force and perhaps then to introduce Jason to us. Yasmin.
Thank you very much. I'm under instructions to take this from you.
That's right.
To do that. Thank you. That's great. Okay. So thank you, Shreya, and thank you for organising this event, and particularly to Dr. Jason Arday for joining us this evening. So as Shreya said, this timing couldn't be better in the sense that this morning the Race Equality Task Force, Oxford's Race Equality Task Force, launched its consultation. So if you go online, you can see the work that the task force has been doing, and also some of the proposed interventions that the task force is suggesting that the university take up over a 1 year, 3 years and 5 year span to address race equality and to propose measures for tackling racial equality across the University of Oxford. So the Race Equality Task Force has been around for a year, and there are about 30 of us on it across all different parts of the university, different divisions, different departments, but also students, postdocs, members of staff, as well as academics. So it's been a really interesting set of conversations, and very, very kind of productive and interesting and challenging set of conversations. But Dr. Arday was a consultant to the task force too, so this is particularly good timing and great to have you here this evening. So I'm not going to go into all the details, because it'd be great if you had a look, and also do please make your own suggestions, because those proposals that are on there are proposals at the moment, and we need voices to kind of support the ones where you think the most difference can be made. But they're addressing things like diversity of staff and students, culture and community, communications and engagement, how the university can better project itself, research and impact, what kind of research gets done in the university, and the deadline for responses to the proposed proposals is 1st of December. So you've got a little while to go online and have a look at that. But really, all of the suggestions are about trying to make a bit of a step change in accelerating the way that the university acts across race, addressing underrepresentation, but transforming actually the experience of people who are already here, of students and staff who are here. And Kellogg, I hope, don't want to assume too much, but we hope that Kellogg is a college that is really taking this seriously and is addressing it. And we're running events this week for Black History Month, and the exhibition will open tomorrow evening, displaying information and research about Oxford's first Black women students. So do come along and have a look at that too. It's up until Monday. So I'm going to now introduce Dr. Jason Arday, our Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology at Durham University, and very prolific. I was scrolling down your list of publications. I can't begin to talk about them all, but mainly addressing questions of race, education, race and class, social justice, intersectionality. Has a new book coming out, Being Young, Black and Male, Challenging the Dominant Discourse. That would be his third book. Coming out, and as I said, was also really helpful to the task force, so thank you for that. So I will now hand over to Jason.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. First things first, just want to say a huge thanks to Shreya, Jasmine and Shabazz for having me here. It's an absolute honour to be here, to be honest. I was actually doing some research on the college, and I joked with a friend. I was kind of saying, "Do you think it's got anything to do with because I love cereal. Cereal's like my thing, right?" So I was like, "Do you think it's got anything to do with Kellogg's, as in And I was like, "Probably, Jay. Just have a look." Googled it, and then Wiki picked it, and then what do you know? 1990. That's when this came to fruition. So it's amazing to be here. The most important question I'll ask you today, or the most important thing I'll say today, is how are all of you? Are you all well? Good. It is not lost on me that it is 5:45 or maybe even 6 o'clock, and you've all chosen to be here on a Wednesday evening. So thank you so much. I mean, in many respects, I don't really have anything planned. So a lot of this is the most important thing I think when you're talking to people, in my opinion, is authenticity. And I think it's hard to do that when you plan things within an inch of its life. So the only thing I do know is the title of what this is. And that actually derived from the fact that I love rock and roll. That's my favourite genre of music. And in particular, when I was asked to do this, at the time I was asked to do this, I was asked to give an abstract for this. And I was like, okay, well, I was listening to the Rolling Stones at the time, and I was listening to Jumpin' Jack Flash. And the opening tenet to Jumpin' Jack Flash is I was born in a crossfire hurricane. And so I was thinking of academia, particularly when we think of how Black and ethnic minority people reside in academia. And this kind of thorny terrain, you're navigating these landmines from one place to another, trying not to get decapitated in some way. And if you look across the intersect, that's common for most people. So for example, for women, for people from particular class backgrounds, disability, religion, sexuality, etc. But when we use people like Kimberly Crenshaw's ideas around intersectionality in its original guise and what it was for, in some ways before it got co-opted, and we think about those intersections but being a Black or ethnic minority person, it's completely different, particularly if you're a Black or ethnic minority woman. It's an even more stranger existence, for want of a better term. So for me, that crossfire hurricane, I'm going to supplement it intersperse it with some of my story and just generally what I've done with my research over the last 6-7 years. So it's very easy to start this off by saying I was a PE teacher. That was my background. I was a PE teacher, and interestingly today I was talking to someone and they said to me, "Jason, what were you doing 7 years ago?" So we were having this conversation about, with some school kids before I had all these meetings, say, "What were you doing 7 years ago?" And I said, I was a lecturer teaching physical education, and I had a weekend job at Sainsbury's on a Saturday, and I had a job on a Sunday, a cleaning job for a company, cleaning toilets at major stadiums in London. So that was my job. So he was talking about this with the students, with the pupils in school, and so I was like, so I told them what I was going to be doing today, and they're like, "Ooh," and I said, "Yeah, I know." "Ooh," they're like, "What are you going to say?" I said, I don't know, any ideas? And so I said, all I know is that it's crossfire hurricane, and this is it. And so the reason why I kind of emphasise this is because one thing I became really cognizant of doing this research was barometers. So levels are a really interesting thing, and more importantly, the level we use to judge particular groups of people. Now, I think with some sort of confidence and authority, I can say this, bearing in mind I've done research around it. So if the level to get into academia is here, so this kind of this Crossfire hurricane, that's the standard that we use. Now, when we think about this idea of black excellence, and I say that in a political sense in terms of black and brown and indigenous, that level is somewhere beyond the stars. And the reason why I say that is because we have a lot of data to point towards that. Now, we have 23,000 professors in the UK, 23,000 professors. 15,500 are white male, 5,500 are white female, and as of probably 2 weeks ago, we have now 38 black female professors. Now, if you look at the 2011 census, and obviously the next one's coming out next year, that probably doesn't look so bad. 14% of the UK are made up of black and ethnic minority people, 4% are black. That's not a bad return for less than 1% of professoriate to be black. But when you think of the number of black and ethnic minority students, and that's me being facetious, by the way, but the counter argument, if you think of the number of black and ethnic minority students that go into higher education, just under half of that million populace of students that go are from a black or minority ethnic background, including international students within that as well. And then if you go into kind of PGR taught, you've got 2/3 that are made up of black and ethnic minority. Now, if you kind of think about the academic pipeline, generally speaking, you would think that actually more people then would go through this pipeline. So I guess the question is, why doesn't that happen? Why do you have such a paucity of numbers when you get to the professoriate, and why do you have black and ethnic minority people residing in the precarious jobs, not progressing through the academy, both in professional and academic services? Now, it could just well be because, we're not good enough, which is something that I've been told before. Or there's something inherently bigger in all of this, which is systemic and institutional. And one thing I would often say, the most common question I'm asked is, Jason, how did you get to where you got to? So without navel gazing, that is a question that I'm asked. I would say at least twice a week. And I always say to people, it's really difficult. I couldn't give you a blueprint. I can tell you what you need to do, but I couldn't really give you a blueprint. Like, why couldn't you give us a blueprint? Why can't you tell us what you need to do? I was like, well, this is the thing. You can pay the freight on everything, right? You can do your BA or BSc, you can do your master's, you can do your PhD, you can do a postdoc, you do all of those things. But actually, because of how these structures work and how they disable, egalitarian principles, so for example, people just having a fair opportunity, what it actually means is that you can do all of that stuff and it may not get you anywhere. Okay, Jay, that's a bit of a shame. Like, do you know what the reason why that might be? Unfortunately, it's something that you probably can't change. But what can I change? I was like, well, you can't change that, and that is going to be a reason. Now, that's kind of what I think in my head to say, but then what I actually end up saying is, right, the first thing you need to learn is how to suffer. It is by default, as a black and ethnic minority person trying to enter the Crossfire hurricane that is the academy, you are going to have to suffer. And in the end, it's a test of fortitude and endurance. It comes down to basically how much are you willing to compromise and how much are you willing to suffer. Now, that's not to say that white academics don't experience the same thing, but it's nowhere near to the same point that black and ethnic minority academics experience, because the academy is white. I don't think I'm saying anything too radical in that sense. And importantly, the thing with disrupting and decentering whiteness means that we have to challenge all of our ways of knowing. Why is the academy white? That's one of the questions I always ask myself. How did it end up to be that way? Like, why is it such a novelty? I teach students at Durham and they say to me, do you know what, Jay? Like, well, they call me Jace actually, and I really hate that, but they call me Jace. But I kind of don't want to correct them, so I just let them kind of go. And Jace, like, you know, you're like the coolest lecturer I've ever had, and you know, I've never been taught by a black person before. I never even met a black person until I saw you. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of. Well, what are you supposed to say to that? Because you're like, you know, if you serve them, you know you're going to be in trouble, and you're kind of on this side where you're like, yeah, I mean, you know, it'd just be nice to be good, you know, not because I'm black and it's just really interesting monitoring people's reactions. And, you know, I was saying to the students literally yesterday, had a really interesting situation where I went into a lecture room, and my normal disposition is, I like to think, apart from being stood here pretending to be big licks, is that I'm quite unassuming. So I walked into this lecture room, and this was literally yesterday, and someone said to me, are you in the right place? And I said, yeah, I am. And so they're like, PGR students are not supposed to teach at this time. They're supposed to teach at this particular time. So I said, I'm not a PGR student. And so they're like, well, if you're not a PGR student, are you a professional member? Okay, there's something wrong with the machine. Can you fix this machine at IT? And I said, well, I'm actually not very good at IT, and that's not really my job. So it's the only time where I thought to myself, okay, you know, I've got a really good opportunity here to either kind of let this kind of continue and amuse myself, or I can flex the chicken wings and actually tell him what I do, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to flex the chicken wings and the matchsticks, and I'm going to tell him what I do. So I said, I said, if you don't mind asking, what faculty do you work in? So he said, I work in the Faculty of Social Science and Health. I said, oh, that's great. I said, my name's Jason Arday, and I'm the Deputy Executive Dean of the faculty. So, and he's like, oh my God, I hadn't, you look so young. I wasn't, and what was really funny was, he said, you know, if I'd known, I wouldn't have spoken in that way. And I was thinking, yeah, but that's the point. That's the point. Like, that is the point, the case in point. Like, what would I have needed to look like? For a change, I wasn't wearing tracksuit bottoms to my lecture that time. In fact, I actually looked relatively smart for a change going into a lecture, because normally I've got a Stone Roses t-shirt on, Adidas Gazelles, and that's just how I feel comfortable at work. But I mean, this actual time, because I had to chair a meeting, I actually made sure that I looked appropriate, as my mum would say. So it was just really interesting, and you kind of think to yourself, okay, you go through this passage of thinking where you're thinking, why did that happen? Why did that happen? Because also, apart from anything else, there's 100 students in there who've observed this. So that situation, in terms of undermining one's authority, becomes really interesting. And in some ways, it's almost like an anecdote for what it's like being a person of colour in the academy. There's always this constant undermining of one's capabilities, one's reasoning for being here. You know, if we use Paul War's kind of expression, it's this idea of being a space invader. You somehow don't belong here. You're not supposed to be here. You're in the wrong place. You know, and you know, I guess the thing that you always try and tell yourself is, it's not race. It's not race. It's not race. It's something else. It's something else. But really, it's kidology. You're kidding yourself. You're only telling yourself that to get through the hour. Because obviously, if you leak that to students, you know, you're in a situation where that could then be weaponised against you. Get the module feedback. Jason seemed distracted in class. He wasn't focused, you know. Or you'll go to get an email to your line manager. Jason, you wasn't focused today in class. Is there any reason? Yeah, I just faced a racial microaggression. So, you know, it threw me off, you know. But, you know, in the last 5 minutes of the lecture, I got myself together. And it's this whole idea that when you encounter these kind of experiences, you're supposed to somehow find a way to get back on your feet and find a way to make things work again. And what's kind of interesting is I always think of this position as a man. And I think to myself, like, oh, wow, like I've got a tough gig. And then I interview and I speak to and I observe women of colour in those spaces. And it's probably about as bad as you could imagine. And so my feeling sorry for my temporary feeling sorry for myself, which is completely internal, I try not to show it, resides, disperses really quickly, because I'm speaking to women of colour who say, well, you're not even supported by staff, you're recognised by students as being deficit, you're recognised by your colleagues as being deficit, and all of these things are microaggressive. They're death by 1,000 cuts. These small lacerations that kind of make this huge wound. And you kind of think to yourself, with all of that being the kind of landscape and the terrain, how do you kind of take up all of this kind of, I guess, toxic soil and then relay this fertile soil and then find a way to kind of bring people back in, because at the moment, what we're doing in the academy is effectively, we're trying to grow new concepts on toxic soil. And the reason why there's no sustainability with these concepts is because the soil is toxic, right, metaphorically speaking. But I think it requires us to dig this up and actually find out the reasons why certain things happen. So, for me, I've spoken to parliamentarians. I have been an advisor to parliamentarians for nearly 6-7 years now. And one of the questions I ask is, I don't understand, how can there only be like 38 black female professors? How is that actually possible? How come we don't see more people from working class backgrounds in the academy? How come we don't see black and ethnic minority people residing in the numbers that we find at the undergraduate level, postgraduate level and postgraduate research level? How come that doesn't go through the pipeline? And what's kind of really interesting is you kind of get this communal shrug of, I don't know, things are changing, they'll get better, getting better. And, I'm an eternal optimist. I really do think things could get better. But for things to get better, you've got to acknowledge there's a problem. And I guess the rebuttal I always come up against is, well, it's not that bad, is it? Really? Look, 36 is better than none. 155 black academics full stop is better than no black academics, professors even. Look, we've increased our numbers. We've got 5 people in the faculty out of 450. If I take Durham as an example, the faculty I work in, let me get that right. I think it's just over 400 staff, and there is up until recently, there was 2 black people. One's left, and one is Professor Carleen Furman, who actually developed the term contextual safeguarding. And then there's me. So, and what's really interesting is you find yourself in these interesting situations where you're always having to, not necessarily at Durham, just generally speaking, defend why racism exists in the academy. And the thing that I would really encourage us all to think about is, if we took somewhere like Oxford, for example, how do you change a place like Oxford? Now, that's not to criticise Oxford. I could ask the same question of Durham, LSE, I could ask the entire Russell Group. How do you change that? Because actually, there's something really interesting about being civic-facing. Post-92 institutions have tenets of EDI right. They engage in these kind of interventions that look to create social mobility, create these egalitarian spaces, embody diversification in its truest sense. In essence, they serve their community. They're reflective of the community they serve. And that's kind of one of the fundamental principles of a university, to serve its community and to be reflective of that. Now, what I find really interesting is that, I guess, in these spaces, we live in a multicultural, multi-ethnic British society, but our institutions don't reflect that. And if you think of the primary purpose, in my opinion, of education, I think, and this is to be contested, is to prepare people to take their place within society. Or at least one of the reasons is to prepare people to take their place in society. Now, we could make a really strong argument that we're ill-equipping individuals to take that place within society because they don't have all the instruments you need to navigate a crossfire hurricane. Society is difficult, life is difficult. But if we're preparing students effectively not to be able to engage with different types of people from different backgrounds, the actual purpose of education, we're failing those students. Now, beyond kind of fiscal reasons, I pay a lot of money, so I deserve this. Actually, university, what does it do? It's a passage in someone's life. And for a lot of people, it's probably the most important passage. Besides having children, I would say it's probably the most important thing that happened to me, because I was fortunate to be the beneficiary of a new Labour government. Tony Blair's got problems, we all know that, but you know, let's work from 97 onwards in terms of that golden period, 97, 2001. And what it did is it gave a generation of working class children the opportunity to go to university, me being one of them. If that particular government at that time hadn't been in office, in the Premiership, I 1000% wouldn't be stood here now, because there was no way I would have gone to university. It just wouldn't really have happened. So that's a really, really important thing. And I guess when we think of that and we think of these ideas around social mobility, it's about thinking, what is the function of universities? What is its function? And I think one of the things that we all sometimes can get swept up in and we may not do is actually question that function. And I say that because, you know, this kind of neoliberal establishment in terms of the higher education sector, it's almost like a mutual agreement. In some ways, it's a deal with the devil. You know there are bad things about it, but you kind of love it. You kind of, you know, you can't quite separate yourself from. It's like I hate you, but I love you. You don't really know what to do. And it's this weird thing, because I'm stood here criticising our sector, but on the other hand, it's given me, you know, to be absolutely truthful, this amazing life that, you know, when I was stacking shelves in Sainsbury's 7 years ago, I genuinely couldn't have foreseen that. So I guess but then it comes down to this whole thing of, just because it worked for you, that doesn't mean it works for everyone else, right? And that's where the selfishness comes in. And, you know, when I think of academia, I was asked a couple of months ago to describe academia in a word. And I asked my dad for some advice. And, you know, my dad being, you know, a straight talking South African, he said to me, like, he was like, do you know what, Jason, should I tell you something? Do you know academia? He said, I don't know a lot about academia. I'm not as bright as you and the boys, because I've got 3 brothers. So he said, academia, if I had to sum it up in a word, is individualistic. So I said to him, what do you mean? He said, yeah, just about every term could be racialised in some way. But that concept of individualism is colourblind. Everybody, regardless of their race, can be individualistic and they can be selfish. And when you think about how people get ahead in academia, generally speaking, individualism is actually applauded. You know, someone once said to me, Jason, you could be a professor very, very young if you become more selfish. And I was kind of like, I don't really like that idea. It doesn't really align with Ubuntu, doesn't really align with my upbringing. My whole premise is, if I have bread, you have bread, and if you have bread, I have bread. So that doesn't really work with me too well. And he said, yeah, but like, you know, the most successful people in academia, they are selfish. And I was like, well, I don't know. Like, I kind of want to be one of the people, so that kind of goes against what I believe in. But, you know, you do you. You that's what you want to do, you do that. And interestingly, the more and more I progressed in my career, the more and more people I met who made that point to me. Now, these people were not connected at all. Not connected, but they all said the same thing. And then I remember thinking back to what my dad said about this idea of individualism. And what's interesting about this idea of individualism, it doesn't embrace any idea of collectivism. So, for example, there's the secret to becoming an academic. Now, it's interesting who knows those secrets and who's obscured from those secrets. Now, it's not by coincidence that people of colour don't seem to know these secrets. I did a PhD in 2015. 2 days after I finished my PhD, someone said to me, Jason, mate, you're in so much debt. I was like, yeah, I know. Like, he was like, why didn't you just do a studentship? So I was like, what's a studentship? This is 2015, it's not even that long ago. So I was like, what's a studentship? He was like, mate, they pay you to study. They pay you to do a PhD. It's tax-free money. I was like, a studentship? He was like, yeah, surely you know what a studentship is. And so I asked other, I guess, black aspiring academics, do you know what a studentship is at that time? And they were like, no, I've not heard of one. And what's kind of really interesting is, yeah, it seems foreign because everyone knows that now, But it was only up until recently that that secret was let out of the bag. And those ideas around individualism and selfishness and how people gatekeep information, it's amazing who doesn't have hold of that information. Now, if you take, for example, organisations like Leading Roots, which is spearheaded by the wonderful Paulette Williams and Chantal Lewis, those organisations have let the cat out of the bag. Now everybody knows the secret. Now that's the closest you're ever going to get to making it a level playing field. Now what's really interesting is that there was this programme on Channel 4 called The Talk. And The Talk was about the conversations you have with young people of colour about race. And at the end of it, Lenny James said, you know what? People waste so much time trying to make things equal. What would just happen if we all started at the same start line? If we all started at the same start line, what would happen? And it made me wonder, what would happen? Because, you know, people of colour, this is the start line. People of colour are like, they're outside. If we all started at the same line, what would actually happen? Because my point is that you have these people of colour navigating this crossfire hurricane and still finding a way to not only get in the academy and survive it, but thrive it. And it comes back to this idea of suffering. You know, when I've spoken to those people, and I've interviewed probably over 500 academics in the last 5 years of colour, and I would say that's pretty much most of the sector, because there's not, you know, a massive spread of black academics in the sector. It's only 13% as of 2019, courtesy of Advanced HE. When I've interviewed all of them, the one thing they have said is that I have suffered. My family life has suffered, my mental health has suffered, I have lost relationships, I have lost, you know, aspects of my personality that I can't get back, I've lost years that I can't get back. I interviewed one particular person, and they know that I obviously love music, as I told you at the beginning. And in particular, I like REM. So they said to me, like, Jason, you know that song by REM, like Imitation of Life? I was like, yeah, I know that song. It's a great song, great song. They were like, you know that line in it where they kind of say, like, come on, no one can see me cry? I said, yeah, that's a great line. Like, you know, this sugar cane, this hurricane, I'm not afraid, come on, no one can see me cry. So I said to them, yeah, that's a great lyric. And they was like, yeah, it's a great lyric. And, you know, every time I come to work, I apply my makeup on twice. So I said, what do you mean? They're like, well, I have this horrible feeling at work when I get there. I encounter the first 2 hours, you know, racial microaggression after racial microaggression. I have to find a way to deal with it. I can't cry in front of people because if I cry in front of my colleagues, they'll see this as weakness. So I go into a toilet, I cry for about half an hour. I'm fairly certain they think I've got the worst stomach problem in the world. And then I reapply my makeup in the toilet, in my small mirror, where no one can see me cry, and I come back out. And, you know, beyond the jovialness of kind of having this song reverberate in my head, I was literally thinking of the practical application of putting your face on, for want of another expression, in the morning, crying in the toilet because you're encountering systemic institutional violence and racism, and then reapplying this makeup and then going back into the workplace every single day. And, you know, once you get over that jovialness, you're in a situation where you're supposed to be being professional, interviewing someone, and you're sat there crying because you're thinking, you've got to do that every single day. You know, and you completely lose this sense of kind of being, you know, professional, you know, measured, collected, and you're there kind of, you're being comforted. You know, in the end, you're being comforted, and you kind of think, I'm so sorry, I should be comforting you, right? And what's really sad is this is kind of the experience for many people of colour, and particularly women of colour who are at the sharper end of these things, because it's really important to acknowledge this. There is an unfair male patriarchy and privilege that I benefit from as a man of colour. Yeah, and what's really interesting is that I kind of try and explore this in my work. There's this spectrum, and when you're a man of colour and you're educated and you do well, you're either at that end, which is really not great, or you're at this end. There's no in between. When you're a woman of colour and you do great, there is no spectrum. There's no like bad or good is just you're a woman of colour. By default, you just get the scourge of the earth upon you. And that's something that when you try and explain that to white people, it's very hard for them to fathom unless they actually speak to a woman of colour and ask them a very simple question. Can you explain to me what it's like being a woman of colour? And I think interestingly, sometimes, as my dad would say, you don't ask questions, things you don't want to hear the truth to. So people don't ask those kind of questions. People don't ask, white colleagues don't ask me, Jason, like, do you find it difficult doing your job? Is it difficult being a black person? You don't ask those questions. You don't, because, who actually wants to hear the truth about that? The truth is a powerful thing, right? What I want to kind of get across through these kind of little anecdotes and parables is that academia as a space embodies the idea of meritocracy in many respects. Now, meritocracy, in theory, is a fantastic idea. In practice, it's cobblers, really. But in theory, it's a great idea. Now, it comes down to who holds the locus of that theory and its merit, and who wants to see that change. Because for people to give up privilege, for people to disrupt the normative orthodoxy, the status quo, people would stand to lose things from doing that. I think that's a fair thing to say. People stand to lose things from doing that. But in terms of embracing this idea of egalitarianism and embracing all the ideals that we have all these lofty ideals that we associate with the academy. And for us to truly embrace that and to see that come to fruition, at some point we do need to think about how we change this space to be more inclusive. And that's a really important thing. Just want to finish with one thing. My entire adult life, so I told you, I started out as a PE teacher. And when I was 21, I found I was going to be a dad. So that was that was great. And I remember at the time thinking to myself, like, okay, going to be a dad. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I was trained to be a PE teacher, so I thought, okay, those that can't do, teach, and those that can't teach PE. So I thought, okay, right, at least I can teach PE. I'm a failed sports person, but I can teach PE. And even that, I nearly cocked up. And I remember I had this one particular lecturer at the time, who I won't name their name, but they came in, and their first name, let's just say their first name was Gifty. My mum's name's Gifty, but that's not the case. But they came in and they said, it's like, oh, Gifty. And they're like, actually, I'm no longer Gifty, I am Dr. Gifty, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, after the class, everyone went out, and so I said sorry, Dr. Gifty, if you don't mind me asking, and at this point I was 22. I said, how'd you become a doctor? So they said, they looked at me. It's like, Jason, you're just about scraping your way through university. If I were you, I wouldn't be thinking that far ahead, because you probably won't be a doctor. Now, I didn't take any offence to this, because I thought, she's right. I am just scraping my way through. And by the way, I'd love to have the excuse of saying I was drinking or messing around, but I was trying my absolute best. And I was scraping my way through uni on a PE degree. So I remember thinking, and I probably had a couple of days where I thought about this, and I thought, do you know what? I don't know if I agree with that. And I went back and I said, I don't know if I agree with that. I think I could get a PhD, if that's what it's called. Is that what you said it's called, Dr. Gifty? And they were like, yes, that's what it's called. I was like, okay. And so anyway, fast forward, so I was 22 at that point. Fast forward 8 years, and I found myself in this position where I was on the cusp of getting a PhD. I found myself on this cusp, and I remember thinking to myself, during the Viva, which was going horribly wrong, I thought to myself, do you know what, Jason? you're crippled by fear at the moment. You're crippled. What was interesting when you went and said to Dr. Gifty that I don't agree with you. I think I could get a PhD. Where is all of that? Where is that should have been? Where's that all gone? And anyway, came back to me in the exam and the Viva exam, and luckily found a way to creep over the line. Thank God. Fast forward 6 years later, so that's now at 36. And it's quite ironic that today I'm doing this, but this has been announced today, but it's something that I've known for quite a while. So I literally dedicated my entire adult life, professionally speaking, to getting or mobilising as much black endeavour in the academy as I could. And I told you about the professors that I spoke to when I was younger who said, you'll get ahead if you're selfish. If you're selfish, you'll get ahead. And I was like, no, I want to bring people, as many people as I can with me. And it's not about how you get there, it's about the way you've done it. And there's probably only one person here who knows this, but yeah, so fast forward 6 years, and in July, I end up being in a very interesting situation. So I'm in an interview, and I'm thinking the interview's gone well. And I thought to myself, do you know what? If someone gets the job over me, do you know what? To go from working at Sainsbury's, stacking shelves and cleaning toilets in this cleaning job to get to this point, this is great. Anyway, I get a call about a week later. And normally when you get the successful candidate, they're told on the day. So I'm thinking, like, oh, do you know what? Like, why are you dragging out the misery? Just put a gun to my head, put me out of my misery. Why are you making me wait a week? Anyway, I get an email saying, can we meet via Zoom? Zoom's all the rage, right? And we have this meeting during Zoom. And they're like, Jason, how do you think the interview went? So I said, well, how do you think the interview went? Because obviously, if you're asking me, I'm probably not, I'm slightly biased in my opinion. It's your opinion that matters. And they said, well, and the person started laughing and said, Jason, I thought you were brilliant, and everyone else thought you were absolutely brilliant. And so I was thinking, okay, but is this one of those where, like, in The Apprentice, when Sir Alan Sugar says, like, with regret, you're fired. And they turn around, and she turns around to me and says, we'd be honoured to have you here. We'd be honoured to have you here and for you to be a professor here. And I thought to myself, like, what did you say? So I said, what did you say? She was like, yeah, we would like you to be a professor of Sociology of Education at Glasgow University. So I said to her, like, no way. And obviously, as professional Jason then burst into tears. And I was like, I can't believe it. And so we spent the next 20 minutes of me saying, I can't believe it, Jason, you really deserve it. No, I can't believe it. Like, yeah. And after I got off that call, I remember thinking to myself, bloody hell, like, if a cowboy like me can get, at 36, can get to that stage, then it just goes to show, like, that there are so many black and ethnic minority people that are unbelievable. I'm not gifted. I just worked hard. And as I said, I was probably willing to suffer. And that's probably what it came down to. But the point is, it shouldn't actually have to come to that. There are so many gifted black and ethnic minority people in higher education. And what I would love 5 years from now is for us to be able to say that there's not 155 black professors in the UK, but there's like 5,000, 10,000. There's not people stagnated in particular positions, because my story is probably, it's a funny story because it's a funny story. Like the PE teacher that went on to become a professor of Sociology of Education. It is funny because, yeah, my friends are like, I can't believe people actually listen to you. You're like, this is the guy who laughs when he breaks wind. Now he's like, he's giving talks to people. But, the point I'm making is that that idea of working from behind the start line, I really want people to understand just how difficult that is. As a person of colour, you have no choice in that. You are positioned behind the start line without any consent. You are just told that is where you start, by proxy of a society that judges people on the basis of the colour of their skin, and deems them to be good enough on that basis alone. Forget ability, just that basis alone. I always think back to what things were like. And for me, you know, anything that always happens that's amazing professionally, I always think back to Sainsbury's and the cleaning job, because those times were really, really difficult. And if someone had said to me I'd be in this particular college at this particular moment, I would never ever imagine that. And I just wanted to say it's an absolute privilege to have been here, and I really appreciate you indulging the ramblings of a madman for, I don't know, maybe 40 minutes or so. But thank you so much for your time. And, you know, it's not every day you get to be, well, it is sometimes most days, but, you know, to be in the company, to be in such distinguished company and such intelligent people, my aim is to hopefully learn off all of you. And just thank you so much for your time. I'm incredibly grateful, and it really, really means a lot, more than you can believe. Yeah, I mean, I've got to tell my youngest, Mad Dog, who's like 6, I've got to take him swimming tomorrow, and he'll ask me, what did you do today? And I'll tell him, I went to Oxford. Don't lie. But, do you know what I mean? Like, whereas my daughter will be like, yeah, don't lie, Dad, you think? Because people always think, like, you know, you're such a silly person, so how do you end up in these situations? But nevertheless, we're here, and you know, it's only made all the better because you get to share it with beautiful people like yourselves. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason, for
Oh,
sharing
no
your
worries.
story. Really, we are the ones who are privileged, and we hope it's a long association with Kellogg. So we're glad to have you, and we're probably not going to let you go that easily.
Oh,
so
that's really kind of you.
Glad to have you here. We have about 20 minutes for questions, and the beautiful faces looking at you were really enjoying your talk, and I wonder if there are questions out there. I'm going to start off with my own. I've used the privilege that I have, having heard you. I'm going to start this Q&A, but feel free to ask, and we'll take a couple of questions from the audience and bunch them up, and perhaps you can take them together. So you began with the word authenticity. And I was wondering about this, that when the space that you're in, the norm is so far from your authentic self, how do you bring yourself to truly be authentic? Because what ends up happening is that, you know, you put that makeup on, you end up covering, you try to replicate that norm, you think there's value in, you know, let me just be whatever the space that I'm in. You know, if academics are meant to look a certain way, let's look a certain way. We're meant to write in a particular voice, let's do that. I think that mimicking of the norm sort of takes away from the message of let's be our authentic selves. The young academics looking at you here, how do you think they can be authentic when they don't have the number of years with them to say, you know, I know that the cost of not being authentic is high. They don't know that yet. They're probably going to be mimicking the norm. They're going to be judging that and thinking, well, it's probably easier for me to see and observe and just be whatever is being expected of me.
That's such a good point, Shreya. I mean, I think it depends what people come home to, metaphorically speaking, and literally. Like, so, you know, within oneself, it you know, origin is very important, and the absence of that origin makes one a lost person, in my opinion. And my upbringing was like a really central thing in that. So the biggest thing in my upbringing, the single biggest thing was humility. That was like the single biggest lesson I learned growing up in my family was humility. And I knew a central part of that was authenticity. So but I also recognise that authenticity in some ways is privilege. You know, there are certain people who are allowed to be their authentic selves at work, and that's not questioned, and there are certain people that aren't. Now, in the context of myself, I recognise that as a man, I'm unfairly privileged in that regard. And so men are often encouraged to be like that, and can be like that. When women are like that in a workspace, they're often seen as being combative, or being contrary, or being difficult. and there is an unfair privilege there. So it's not the kind of liberty of everyone to have that ability to do that, unfairly so. So it's important I acknowledge that, because I think it's a bit disingenuous to just kind of say, well, I just rock into work and do what I like. I mean, the other caveat to that is I'm a black man and I can't actually just do what I like. But the God's honest truth is I don't know how else to be. But I think it's important to marry that against the fact that there are people, particularly women and women of colour, who do know how to be, but they're not given the same space to express that need. And if they are able to express that need, it's conditional upon being subservient to something. Male patriarchy, male hierarchy, or power, just generally speaking.
Yeah. What about communities of support along your own journey, and from what you're seeing in terms of what exists out there for young scholars? Do you think there are enough communities, enough groups which offer support in terms of just letting the secret out of what academia is, but also I think just doing it gently enough, because it can be quite harsh to come into academia and to be told actually it's not going to work out, which is probably the truth, but you want to let it out gently. By the time that somebody has realized it, they've probably built the resilience to also fight that.
That's a great question. I mean, I think academia is quite medieval in that there are a lot of people that have gone through these draconian medieval processes to get to where they get to, right? And I think sometimes there's this idea of, you have to earn your rite of passage. And I think that there's a generation of academics coming through that are a bit more collegiate and kind of want everyone to do well. It's always, that kind of thing I said, if I have bread, you have bread. If you have, there's kind of that kind of camaraderie there where we all want one another to do well, or at least that's kind of how I view it in terms of this particular vanguard of, amazing academics, particularly academics of colour that are coming through. I mean, in terms of communities, I think more and more are developing, and I think more and more people are being able to express themselves within those communities, and those communities are now occupying dominant spaces, which makes that more of the norm rather than something that wasn't the norm, which is brilliant. And probably in relation to myself, and professionally speaking, there's barely anything I've done on my own in my life, but I never had help. And I would be honest enough to say if I had done, besides like Chantel, who's sat there, and like a couple of, maybe I could count on one hand, I never really had help. And that's because, I would ask people for help, and if there's 5 directions to get to the train station, they'd say to me, they give me, point 1, point 2, point 3, and then say, when you get to the end of the road, like, ask someone else for the directions. Now, and that's the secret bit, that's what I mean. Like, people would never divulge what you needed to do. They give you enough information just to get to the bridge, but in terms of getting over it, they wouldn't actually tell you the rest. And so what ends up happening is you have to end up figuring that out for yourself. And my experience of that made me so determined to basically be the Dave Grohl of academia. So they say Dave Grohl's like the nicest guy in rock and roll. So my aim was like to be the nicest person in academia, and anyone who ever asked me for help, I'd do everything I could to help them. And yeah, I particularly favoured working class people and people of colour, because that's what I am. I'm a Kansas Estate kid. That kind of came good. So that was and what amazed me was this idea of like you'd often hear people say like, we're a community of practice, there's a brotherhood, there's a sisterhood, and then when I got in the academy, I realised that in some respects it was kind of fallacy. I think it was performative that was the case, and I think what's changed in the last 5 years is that that's not performative anymore, that's actual reality. And you have, like I said, this generation of people coming through that are more collegiate, want to help one another, want to support one another, and take as much pleasure in themselves doing well and there's other people doing well. And I think that is the bit that isn't individualistic, and that's the bit that I hope we can all hold on to, because as my dad says to me all the time, success is a useless thing when you've got no one to share it with. And you may be successful and you may have got there faster than the speed of light, but if you've got no one to share it with and no one to celebrate it with, what is it actually worth if you've desecrated on your own people? Do you mean it doesn't really mean anything in my opinion?
Fantastic, thank you. I could go on asking, but perhaps
yeah, I have a question. Thank you so much, Jason. One of the things, I mean, it kind of relates to this idea of the individualistic versus the sort of collective action of academics. And one of the things on the task force that came up was how many people, especially black students and black staff, and I know there are people here who end up giving their time to sort of other activities for the university, like being on, doing outreach, access, publicity, all those sorts of things. And that, that's really necessary and important work, I think, but I wonder how you see that. Because I mean, okay, one of the things that actually the task force is sort of suggesting is those things should be factored into the appreciation of people's academic careers, but also maybe even recompensed, or I don't know what you think about that.
I think the latter is more. I think the latter is actually really important. Recompense or remunerating. I think when you value something. I myself am not motivated by money, I can genuinely say that, but I do think there has been historically an exploitation of ethnic minority labour towards mobilising EDI issues that it's not like they created those problems, but they're asked to solve them, right? I mean, the logic in itself is skewed. Yes, consult with those individuals who've experienced it, but to say, right, you come up with a solution to solving racism, hang about, I'm experiencing it every day, and you want me to figure it out as well? Like, this is incredible. So, and often, like, you're told it's for your own professional development, but then you go to, progression committees, and they turn around and say, well, that's not considered for progressing. Like, you need to have more publications and more things. Well, if you weren't lumbered with having to solve racism as the person experiencing it, then maybe you would have time to do more publications or do all these kind of things that it uses metrics for. So either we change that or we recognise and change, I think, the metrics we use for how we promote people, for how people progress in the academy, in professional services and academic staff as well. And I think the really, really important thing with that is really thinking through what that looks like in terms of, how do we find a balance between ensuring that this type of labour is recognised and it's seen as complicit knowledge that should be recognised in promotions or fiscally or reputationally, and ensuring that we also don't exploit these individuals who are, important we don't forget they are suffering at the hands of racism and the structures that underpin that, which is whiteness. So I think that's a really, really important thing because, too often, I've been in situations myself where people say to me, Jason, it's for your own professional development, it's great for you. And, to have a white line manager telling you that when this is causing me stress, this is not gonna make my life better, that in itself is quite interesting. And I think it's very interesting who purports that message. So obviously, my thing is to always try and disrupt that where possible, and it's probably cost me a few jobs down the years, but I can sit with myself knowing that I was actively disrupting that, recognising that my colleagues were at a disadvantage to that as well. So I think that's important.
Fantastic, thanks. We must have questions from the audience. I see Urvi has a hand up. Is there anyone else that we can take a couple and Jason can hear them?
There's one here as well.
There's one there and one at the back. Fantastic. Let's take these three. Urvi, start us off.
Thank you so much for such a fantastic talk. I wanted to hear your thoughts on how, a lot of academics of colour, a lot of the subjects they work on are automatically categorized as not being mainstream. So if you work on gender, you work on race, you're working on something that is considered narrow. How do we disrupt an academy which sees it as perfectly viable for you to say study accounting in England, without having to compare it against anything, but you study a province in another part of the world, focus on millions of people, but somehow you can't do it without reference to what is considered normal. So yeah, I mean, I'd be
Yeah.
interested in your thoughts on how we can disrupt some of
That's
that.
a great question. I mean, how do we disrupt that? I guess is this locus of knowledge that we have in terms of what we perceive to be, you know, there's ways of doing things, right? And if you're a person of colour, by default, you're going to study race, and you're going to study a particular diaspora of people in a particular part of the UK. It's not even the world, it's the UK, because that's the only place where we can study diasporas of people. You know, you talk about, you know, the global south or different parts of the world, or global north, different parts, you're not able to do that. And I guess the ways of disrupting that are really, it's how we decenter these canons of knowledge, in my opinion. So these canons of knowledge are predominantly Western, predominantly Eurocentric, and the gatekeepers around that are reflective of that particular diaspora. So that's what they promote. And there's an argument to suggest that, well, you're in Europe, it's, you know, predominantly white, so we're studying, so that's the deal with it. I guess my retort to that always is we're global citizens, and it's in our best interest to be cognizant of everything that's happening in varying diasporas around the world, Black, Indigenous, you know, South Asian, East Asian, like it's hugely important. And what is really interesting is that when, you know, I guess the thing that I always found interesting was international students and the globalization of higher education, marketisation of it. When they come to the UK to study, it's absolutely fine, because there's a transactional something that happens there. When you then turn around and say, I want to study this diaspora of people, or you come with a certain set of qualifications or backgrounds, like, well, that's not good enough against what we have in the UK. So, you know, you have to do another qualification, or you need to do a top-up degree, or you need to learn how to research in this particular way. I don't recommend researching that group of people, I recommend researching this group of people. And because of that hierarchical structure, the supervisor says that, or the academic says that, and you've got to listen to that. And I think what is important is that we challenge that. Now, how do we do that? Because there is a hierarchy there in terms of doing that. I think, rightly or wrongly, I think when you're a PGR student, I think that gap narrows considerably, because arguably you're actually the expert from the beginning to the end. The supervisor's there to really navigate that path with you, but they're not unless they're, you know, it's very rare you find a supervisor who's the exact expert in the area you are studying as a PhD student. So for me, it's always important that you have that kind of professional, let's just say professional challenge, for want of a better word, and pushback on that, because I think all too often, you know, through these kind of spheres of hierarchy, you know, that they're used as intimidatory factors. Well, if you don't listen to me, I won't recommend that you go through, you know, the transfer from MPhil to DPhil, all these kind of things. But actually, I think there are better reporting mechanisms, and students have more autonomy than they realise. I think the problem is that it's not made transparent about how students can access those systems to be able to challenge supervisors who have those kind of narrowing and neutralising ways of thinking. So I think that's really important. But I would always say to the person that, you know, you're the expert in the area, and it's really important that you know, I always say to my PhD students, if you have an idea, don't be swayed on that. My job is to guide you. My job is not to tell you what is right and what is wrong. You have the hypothesis, and you work with that, and your idea is to make this contribution to knowledge. And you can't do that if somebody's influencing you. You need to do this, you need to do, you need to. If someone's doing that all the time, you end up producing, you know, that's why there's so many clones of the same people in academia, right? There's so many people who have done the same thing, and then with a straight face they say, this is original contribution to knowledge. And you're like, no, it's not. No, it's not. My PhD is not an original contribution to knowledge, but I did it because my supervisor told me, if you do that, you'll pass. And then It's like, I've not published anything from it. I don't think anyone's ever read it. It's on reflective practice. So this is what I mean. Like, you end up doing what your supervisor wants you to do. And it's this idea that, I wanted to study, if I was able to choose, the educational experiences of minority ethnic children or migrant children settling in the UK. But they said that was a bad idea. Now, when you're green and you're wet behind the ears, you're like, okay, well, I believe you. I'll do what you tell me to do. But, your ears seem a lot drier than mine was back then. So I think you're going to make better choices than I did. So I think it's really important that you have that courage of conviction. And if that's what you want to do, you do it. But that's the sword, that's the hill you've got to be willing to die on. Because obviously your supervisor's going to be waiting, not your supervisor. But a supervisor will be waiting and say, told you. Told you so. Yeah, right, well, Yasmin won't say that to you. Yeah, so that's really important. Drills just said, not your supervisor, yeah. So, but it's the thing. So it's really important to have that courage of conviction. I think that's hugely important. No worries.
I'm conscious of the time, so could we take these two questions together? And if anyone else has a question, now is your time to raise the hand and we'll take it. Fantastic. So the last one's there. Gentleman to my right, the lady straight in front of me, and then one to the left. Sir.
Interesting talk. Like you, I'm black male. I used to be young, not anymore. And like you, I've spent my professional life predominantly in white spaces. I think, if I look at the difference between myself and you and other black British people, the advantage that I have is that I was not born in a predominantly white environment. I grew up in Jamaica. And therefore, when I immigrated to the US to go to graduate school, undergraduate and graduate school, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be as good as anyone else.
Yeah.
And looking back on my journey, my first year in undergraduate, there was a new professor in the physics department who was black. And because I did well in his class, he said, hey, come work for me, right? And that one, it's just luck, but that one little thing meant that I got many different, programs. Yeah. It meant that I did well enough to get into graduate school, which meant I went to a good graduate school. And because I went to a good graduate school, and I'm an engineer, the thing is, if you're black in a PhD, if you're a black PhD in social sciences, everyone says, okay, yeah, fine. If you're an engineer, they're like, whoa. Yeah. And I leverage that, right? Because it means actually you earned it, right? Rather than if
hey, I just realised what you said. If you're hey.
What I'm saying is, the perception is, if you're black and you got a PhD in the social sciences, it's not really a PhD.
It's going on thin ice here. No, I'm just joking. Yeah.
Right? Okay, it's my truth, but hey, I might be wrong. And my kids constantly tell me that I'm wrong, and I'm beginning to acknowledge that. I'm learning about that. But I think I've been through what you've been through, right? I'm coming out the other side. I've got kids who are in graduate school, so I have to be optimistic. But I think, if you want to see more represent a broader spectrum of people in academia, it's about role models. Because you got to think, I can do that. And for a lot of people, like you said, you didn't know about studentships, right? Because nobody told you, but there wasn't anyone there to say, hey, he's there, how did he get there? Yeah. And then you ask that question, you learn that. So I think you've got a lot to do, mate.
I've been doing a lot. But there's never enough. There's you're right. I'm being a bit of a prat, but there is.
That's all right.
There is a lot more that we can all do, and that's the thing. One of the things I always think is, and look, I'm saying this amongst friends, but that there are kind of senior academics, and I look at them and I think they could be doing a lot more. I think there's a very performative element sometimes about making it can look like one is doing something when actually they're not. So I recognise that me writing books, papers, applying for research bids, it doesn't actually really affect anyone. It's the things and the spaces you occupy and how you bring people into those spaces. That's what changes things. And I guess, like I said, I think what's interesting with this generation coming up is that I think they all recognise the potency of that. It's not just about that, because when I write books, papers and apply for bids and win them, the only person who benefits from it is me, really, if I'm being honest from a professional point of view. It doesn't actually benefit the people I want to affect. So I think there needs to be, the great thing about being a school teacher is that element of theory and practice, that praxis element, and that's something that it doesn't really exist in academia. There's a lot of theory behind how you do things, but there isn't actually the practice element. And I guess the praxis element, I think, is what we all need to engage in. Myself, first and foremost included, you know, in terms of making sure that we do all we can to give all types of people the best opportunity to succeed in the academy, I think.
Fantastic. We are out of time. Might we continue this conversation? Or Jonathan, do we have a couple of minutes? Fantastic. Thanks very much. We should take the last two questions as we promised. If you want to go ahead.
Hi, thank you. That was an excellent talk.
Oh, thank you.
I've been very aware of the financial privilege that it costs, or that I have, that has allowed me to make the decisions I've made to get to this point in my career. And the financial privilege that I have to allow me to take a job that doesn't make as much money as I would in another field or industry outside of academia. And to me, that's an elephant in the room of this equity conversation, is that if we can't provide people with the means to have home ownership as a goal, or to exceed the means of their families and to help their families, then we're not doing enough. And I wonder what you think about that as part of the conversation, because I didn't see yesterday in the Race Equity Task Force webinar, they talked about not having pay gaps between ethnicities, but I'm concerned about the incentives and the financial costs to being in academia in the first place.
Shall we take the last question, Jason?
Yeah,
and we can
of course,
answer
yeah.
them together.
So similar kind of topic, but also I think distinctly different, is the impact of class in this question of accessing academia and then succeeding within academia itself as well. Looking at that and how it kind of relates to race, but also white and working class, and how all those experiences differ, and perhaps have similarities as well.
That's great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go with this one first, this question first, because it's freshest in my mind, and this is going to finish on the finale. But I think the class question is always a good one. What always happens is with class and race, there's always this homogenizing of the two. So, you know, the rare times in society where race occupies the political centre, the question that follows is, well, what about the white working class, right? Now, successive governments have failed the white working class. And it's not an issue that, when you talk about race, you don't need to have that issue. They're two separate issues of equal importance. But that question is brought up never as a single entity question. It's brought up as a question when we occasionally talk about race. Now, I guess for me, the thing that's kind of really important around class, besides the fact that I think when people look at people of colour, they never think of it in terms of class, they just think of them in terms of race. But actually, a lot of people of colour are from working class backgrounds. There is a burgeoning black middle class and South Asian middle class in the UK, and has been for probably the last 30, 40 years, but it is burgeoning, you know, given the amount of time. But I do think something that is really important, and I think it's important for me to say this, and I say it in my work as well, is that I work at Durham, and what is really interesting is how white working class individuals navigate a very elitist space. And a very simple thing would be work and studying. So a lot of students don't have the opportunity to be able to engage in the collegiate system and all the offerings and all the kind of things that come from that, because they have jobs. Now that already creates a dissonance in terms of really finding a sense of belonging, because you're using that space effectively for one purpose, which is to gain an education, but you're not actually taking all of the other cues or capitals that come from developing a network, gaining cultural capital, social capital, all of the things that we would encourage someone to do to get the full kind of fruitfulness of being in a university environment or being in that kind of space and building those lifelong connections. And when you observe that in live Technicolor, it's a really sad thing to observe, because you recognise that while all the students will leave, for example, Durham with a degree from Durham, which in itself is currency, the actual opportunities that they'll have through those networks won't be the same, which means, so in the Durham context, a high number of Durham students that are from the neighbouring northeast area, they actually stay in that area, despite having a degree from an elite institution. And that kind of just tells the entire story. And I guess the reason why I make the point about successive governments is that 72% of the UK population consider themselves to be working class. Obviously, 86% of the population in the UK are white. So that would be, against that percentage, that's a high amount. But we have these governments, Labour as well, that have failed these white working class families. So I think it's important that we think about in higher education why that class thing is something that's kind of always subverted. Why has academia become the province of the white elite middle class? Why is that? And why aren't we collectively doing enough to disrupt that particular province, if that makes sense? And then in relation to the point that you made, could you remind me, please, if that's okay?
It's just about whether it's worth talking about pay, like salary,
Yeah.
overall, as
Sorry,
part
that
of
was
this
it.
discussion.
Yeah, I think it is, because the biggest majority of people that occupy precarious contracts in higher education are black and ethnic minority people, even though they make up the smallest percentage of staff in the sector overall. So I think we do need to talk about pay, and in particular the disparities when you go through the grades. So I'm not saying anything out of turn here, because this is public information here about my own institution, but like there are significant pay gaps, particularly in the professoriate, between men and women at Durham, and it can range anywhere between £15,000 and £20,000. And I wouldn't say that is reflective of just Durham. I would say if you looked in the Russell Group more generally, I think it would illuminate some really alarming figures around that. And I guess in terms of the precariat, what is interesting is, how universities are exploiting the precariat in terms of the gig economy. So for example, a lot of fixed term contracts can stay within that 23-month period. Now, legally speaking, if it stays within that 23-month period, universities don't, if it goes into that 24-month period, universities are actually they actually should be providing a permanent contract with better pay conditions and pension conditions. But a lot of universities know the stopgap is 23 months and we can cut this person loose, and there's no kind of aftermath. So I do think it's important that we look at HR systems, we look at why this is happening, and why, if you want to know why particular groups of people, working class people, people of colour can't enter these systems, it's because most of them reside in the precariat. And until we disrupt that and we think about these pay structures and how really they advantage white middle class men, and that's not to dig out white middle class men, but that is a fact. They do. And when we're talking about, even when talking about gender equality and we're talking about pay in terms of gender equality, it's important to kind of really hone down on who are we talking about here, because when we're talking about gender equality in terms of pay, it doesn't benefit women of colour, and it definitely doesn't benefit white working class women. So again, there's still, even when you're trying to close that gap within the gender, let's just say particularly women, there's still a massive gap anyway, because black women and women of colour are still suffering at the sharper end of that, and white working class women are suffering at the sharper end of that. So it's kind of important for us to have these conversations and really drill into that data, because I do think that the gap, the chasm, it is widening, and it's widening through the precariat because more and more people are on fixed term contracts. That's a really dour note to end on. Sorry.
Jason, we'll continue to think so much about what you've said today. Really appreciate you having been with us. It's your first time, but we hope there are many more times to come. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks to you all for coming.